Thomas and Frederick. With Thomas and Frederick. With Thomas and Frederick.
Welcome to State of the Franchise, the podcast that talks about franchises of all shapes, sizes, backgrounds, genres, and types. I am one of your hosts, Tom Stadler, here with my co-host, as usual, the one and the only, Mr. Fred Dakin. Oh, don't.
What? I just wanted to set the mood.
Now I got to put in like trumpets at the beginning and like that like score that's like, I think it's like a Handel song that.
Yeah, you pan in on the podcast. We look like a little house, but then you realize it's not a dollhouse, it's an actual house, and we're podcasting in it.
Fred, you're just making me anxious in an episode where we're going to be talking about a lot of anxiety.
Yeah, we're going to talk about anxiety today.
Talk about anxiety. We're going to talk about grief more than anything else.
But we're going to talk also about world-class filmmaking.
Indeed. Yeah, it's a definite transition episode following our no longer Scream of the franchise. This is kind of the echo of the Scream of the franchise.
It is, definitely.
Or Frankenchise. Look at that. I was yelling at you about it, and now I didn't even get it right.
It's a hard one because it's so complex and well done. You know, it's hard to get right. It's like a souffle.
That's true. I feel like next year we're just going to have to come up with something very simple, like this is scary.
but you're right. This is, people who are just getting into the groove of us doing scary content. This is kind of us taking one step out and towards other, stuff to talk about.
Yeah, something more on the dramatic end, which of course is the filmography of Ari Aster, his unofficial grief trilogy, I think someone referring it to.
Yep, that I've heard it called that.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll probably get a more official name as the years are progress, but it's still pretty fresh. These movies are only made in the last 5 years.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure one day we'll get like a Criterion trilogy set, and it'll get some great name for it then.
Yeah, absolutely. And here to talk to us about Ari Aster and all of his exploits, returning to the podcast, is one Mr. Nick Kaldunski. Welcome back to the show, Nick.
Good evening, gentlemen. Happy to be here. And I gotta say, we haven't even started, and I already need a hug.
Oh man. It's kind of, you're like the unofficial guest for our non-scary theme scary episodes, because you were on here for Goosebumps, which
That's
is
right.
kind of like, the training wheels, the starter kit for an Ari Aster movie.
Yeah, a bit. Although this almost falls more in, and we talked a little bit about Mike Flanagan's series, which I think are also quite scary. I don't know. Have you guys watched both of those or all of them?
I've only seen the first two Manors and a little bit of the club, the Midnight Club. I have only watched the first episode of The Fall of the House of Usher. Just been busy.
Yeah. I don't know. You didn't catch any of those things?
I have not started. I have Fall of the House of Usher pegged, but gotta jump in.
There was just like no time, I felt like, this past October.
Yeah, I feel like a show, Fall of the House of Usher, I can watch year round. I can't watch Friday the 13th year round. I got to get in like my Jason and my Freddy's during Halloween and it's funny, like we started watching the Goosebumps show, but to bring that up, we were liking it. I haven't gone back since Halloween because I'm just not in the mood right now.
Oh, but it's trying to wrap up so well.
I know.
It's actually a really good opportunity to talk back because that show has been good. Have you watched any of it, Nick?
I've started it. With the two little kids running around, I don't have quite as much time to throw the spooky stuff on.
That's right.
As I did before.
In between the last episode and this one, you had yet another child.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we should have, as professional podcasters, we should have gone back, listened to that episode to see what our coulda, woulda, shouldas would have been for Goosebumps, because I wonder if because I feel like we want a new show or new something that has more of the veins.
We talked about the show that's out now.
Oh, we did?
We did, because I think when we started going through the coulda, woulda, shoulda, we were like, oh, wait a minute, there's something announced. It doesn't look legit. It might have Justin Long. Sure shit. It's out. It has him in it. He's pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely channeling the barbarian energy in that, which, well, that's a movie we'll talk about at another time, too.
Zach Cregger's got to have a trilogy of movies.
Yeah.
Get into it.
It's kind of like a little theme. But one of the fun things about Ari Aster, I feel like, is I've seen all of his movies in theaters, Fred.
By yourself?
By myself with Nick.
What?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And Nick, I guess, what are some of your memories of those experiences now that we're about to dive into talking about all three of these movies together?
My experiences with Ari Aster's Grief trilogy in theater. I think the best way that I can sum it up, and this is kind of just how I've been revisiting these movies recently, is it's worse than you think, and it doesn't get better. So it's these are not popcorn slasher flicks, right?
No.
Like sometimes I want something a little lighthearted, or I'm a fan of horror movies of all kinds. These are a little heavy. These are a little deeper. There's some recurring themes throughout them, but all three will leave you deeply disturbed for very different reasons.
Oh, yeah.
I thoroughly enjoy them, which is kind of weird to say, but at the same time, they can be a bit of a challenge. So revisiting them was a treat. Watching them in theaters was a great time, particularly because of the cinematography and the score for all three of these, I think, is almost a character in and of itself.
Yeah.
So getting that, like the way that Ari Aster intended, I think was probably the best introduction that I could have gotten.
Yeah.
These movies play supremely better in theaters. And I know that's true for most movies, but I feel these really play well in theaters.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think for a first experience, too, to see it in theaters is something that it will leave an impact on you. It did leave an impact on me, especially seeing Hereditary in theaters.
Mm-hmm.
And while I'll get to talk a little bit about Midsommar and Beau Is Afraid, there was just something so unnerving about watching Hereditary, and just like I felt physically uncomfortable watching that movie.
It's funny you say that, because that feeling on second and third watches, not in theaters, there are a lot of things that I picked up that I didn't see the first time, because the first time I think I was just physically trying to keep pace with the movie because I was so like uncomfortable that there were just things that I missed that I just either didn't register or didn't pick up on, just because I was in fight or flight mode, watching the movie.
Well, and I think part of the first experience with either of these movies is you're trying to understand where it's about to go. And then when you kind of see the curtain get pulled back at the end and see what the whole picture looks like, which is ironically kind of his whole shtick. He loves to show you little hints of what you're about to see at the beginning of the movie, and then only for the end to be like, yeah, the mural at the beginning kind of shows you exactly all the beats we're going to hit throughout the film.
Right.
And it's like, and I think that's something that it makes every one of these a movie you want to revisit, because you want to see how he weaves you through this, and then you could really sit back and enjoy the artistry of what he's put together.
And funny story about that is, actually we'll dive into more of it as we get to each movie, but to your point about the mural, in Midsommar, actually at the beginning of every single movie, well, the three, feature films, all of them have deep foreshadowing on how the end of the movie is going to pan out.
Yeah.
So it kind of goes back to that whole theme of like, not being able to have any control, or your predestination of fate.
Yeah.
As kind of bad as it may be in the cases of these characters, but that was something fun to pick up on.
Absolutely. Fred, you saw all these in theaters, is that right?
Yeah, I've seen all three of these in theaters. I would say with Ari Aster, he's in this new Mount Rushmore for me. And there's only 3 spots. There's a spot for another filmmaker. I don't know who that's going to be, but there's these 3 guys who I love now who are making films, and it's Ari Aster, Robert Eggers, and Jordan Peele, who all kind of came on the scene at the same time and are doing horror, but also doing more than horror with like all of their films. Like, if you, maybe more so Jordan Peele, but like if you ask them, well, even Jordan Peele with Get Out doesn't call that a horror. He calls that a political thriller or social thriller. That's the word.
Right.
But all these filmmakers would probably scoff at the idea of calling any of their films horror films, which is interesting to talk about.
Well, yeah, and I think because it's kind of a way of the reinventing the horror genre in a way, right? And I think you talk about two directors too who have a completely different way they want to approach a horror movie, right? Jordan Peele obviously is very much putting social commentary within that, whereas Robert Eggers is very much kind of revisiting like this feeling of being in a period piece and like, and so you have Ari Aster who's very much like wants to focus on the family drama or like the feelings of emotions and how you feel when you are scared and like what real like horror is to somebody else. It's like it's not watching necessarily Freddy Krueger cut somebody up.
Mhm.
It's oh my god, this person lost somebody who has been such an integral part of their life and watching them try to put the pieces back together and sometimes they can't.
Yeah, and I think one thing that makes them so successful is because of the subversion of the family values. You know, the all three of them have elements of, you know, in many horror films, your family or your closest friend is your support. It's what gets you through the movie. It's what how
Mhm.
you survive at the end. And all of these movies in different ways subvert the very things that the family is supposed to be building your support or
Mhm.
be your lifeline, and it's turning into the thing that does you in
Yeah.
at the end. And I think, you know, calling it we've called it the grief trilogy. I've heard it called a couple other things, but I think in general the recurring themes of family dysfunction, the misuse or advantageous use of comfort within a family or the
Mhm.
lack thereof is a major part of all of these films.
Yeah. And of course, what we are talking about today with Ari Aster is his three feature length films to date. It is Hereditary, which came out in 2018. It is Midsommar, which came out in 2019. It is Beau Is Afraid, which came out this year, right? 2023? Or
Yes.
was it last
Wasn't it around the time Renfield came out?
year?
Because I was
Yeah,
really
it was
pulling for our group
2023.
theater to all go
Yeah,
see that. And no one, everyone was like, no.
Pretty sure it was early 23.
Yeah, it is 2023, of course. I was like, had a question. I'm like, it wasn't a year ago. No way. Um, but yeah, it's definitely it's some very deep-seated emotions and themes throughout these. He is a filmmaker that I think, yeah, like Freddie, the kind of way you said it, he's definitely putting horror into a totally different genre in itself, which is what is making horror so exciting. I'm very happy we're getting a chance to kind of dive into what that means. But I guess one of the things though I wanted to first kind of get throughout this episode is why have his movies resonated more than a lot of the other people who've been making horror recently? Like why is his movies kind of rose to the surface versus somebody else who, like I would say, like maybe a Robert Eggers, you know, when we watch The Witch, which was a very good movie. Like again, maybe right on the cusp of being a horror movie. And it was good, but there's something about the way Hereditary did it that felt different, right? So I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think a big part of it has to do with just it's so well rounded. Like Hereditary, it's deeply unnerving. Um, and Ari Aster has shown that he is a master at developing tension and anxiety. And I think just the fact that all throughout the film, be it music, be it script, be it cinematography, the actual act of the shot, everything is building to this tension pop moment. And every aspect of the film works. There's really nothing in any of these movies where you're like, oh, I didn't really like that, or that didn't really fit with the broader movie. Like
Mhm.
within the universe that of the logic that he's building, it works. And I think something one of the reasons why a lot of people are resonating with these films, or maybe resonate's not the right word, but like they're appreciating the auteur in his environment, is it's transcending horror, it's bringing in these other themes, it's applying family drama through a horror lens to, you know, because sometimes bad things happen and there is no happy ending, which is another theme of his movies. None of them have happy endings.
No.
And
I would argue Florence Pugh maybe has a somewhat happy.
we can talk about that. I disagree, but I think people are connecting with it because it's elevating horror, and I think that's something that has been missing for. I mean, what's the first thing that when you see a good horror movie, one of the first things that anybody compares it to is The Exorcist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what, the 70s?
Yeah.
Can we start comparing modern horror to recent elevated horror where you don't have to go back 40 years, 50 years to compare it to a Mount Rushmore movie?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're finally getting some of that.
Yeah, The Exorcist, directed by William Friedkin.
Yes.
Who you can hear us talk about on another episode.
In fact, 2 recent episodes, because we also talked about him on the Halloween sequel episode. But it's definitely, I think, something you just said, Nick, is a big case for Ari Aster right now. And I'm curious what your thoughts are too, Fred. But going back to a movie like Barbarian, I think a lot of the people were like, oh, this is kind of like the new Malignant or the new Hereditary. And I was like, so we're already going back to 2018 and marking it as like, this is where horror shifted. And we're starting to do a different kind of horror movie. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I do think that his films really, I mean, the content of them, I'm going to just put that aside and talk about just like the framing of the shots and the use of music.
Mm-hmm.
The filmmaker he reminds me the most of is definitely Stanley Kubrick, with the way his shot positioning, the way scenes can be abstract, but also feel like real. And I don't want to, because I know we're going to hit all these movies, but the scene that feels the most Kubrickian to me, other than just his framing, is in Beau Is Afraid. After Joaquin Phoenix has sex with Parker Posey and her body is moved away, to me just looks like a shot out of like Clockwork Orange or something.
Oh, yeah.
I just feel he is bringing like artisanship to horror films, not just on the content of what we've been talking about, the family dynamic, but also like he shoots the shit out of these movies.
He does. I think that was not even the sequence I was going to point out, but we'll talk a little bit more about. Beau Is Afraid feels like a fever dream for about 80% of the movie.
Definitely.
Yeah. And it's definitely just something that he's really kind of put a stamp on it. And it's somebody who clearly has a passion for movies. And I think it's better to understand Ari Aster by going back to where he got started. Ari Aster was born on July 15th, 1986. 1986? Fuck this guy.
I was born in 1990, so I can still live my life and feel fine.
That hurts my heart. I wrote it down and I even was like, didn't resonate with me. I'm like, this man's the same age as I am.
Well, don't Google how young Paul Thomas Anderson was when he made Boogie Nights.
Is he like 27?
Yeah.
Makes you feel good. Makes you feel real good.
There's just that moment where you look at somebody's age and you're like, I've got things ahead of me. I can accomplish a lot. This man made 3 pretty well acclaimed movies and he's not even 40.
Yeah, this is a guy who Martin Scorsese uses for influence on his new movies. Like, he was like, I'm really pulling from Ari Aster in this next one.
Oh my God. It's like that type of statement. You're just like, oh, okay, I see. Because Jordan Peele is how old now? I'm looking him up too. He's 44.
Right. He's been around for a while because he was on the not Saturday Night Live, but the other one.
Matt
right?
TV.
Yeah, Matt. You know, he's been kicking around for a while.
Yeah, but wow. So Ari Aster, 37 years old. Jeez.
37. I
mean, yeah, that's young.
So, new idea for the podcast. Fuck Ari Aster. Is that where we're going? Forget this guy.
Is that what we're going with?
Yeah.
That's the takeaway.
You know what? I'm not even going to go through the rest of it now. No, so he was, born in 1986. God, young strapping lad here as American filmmaker. I'm still composing myself.
Hereditary is like almost 10 years ago.
Yeah, right.
Doesn't it just kill you? You're like, in my life, I could write a book. I could make a movie or something one day. And it's just like people have been doing it for when you were still trying to figure your life out. Stylistically, his films are kind of notable for combining horror and dark humor, which that is something I do think we pick up on more in a second viewing. You don't really want to laugh the first time around, but there's some good jokes in a couple of these.
I think Midsommar is pretty funny, and I think Beau Is Afraid is going to take another watch or two whenever I feel up to it. But I think there's definitely, he's got jokes.
Yeah.
And you see that in his short films too. That's more his vibe.
There's a lot more in the shorts, and then as you move through the feature films, I think Hereditary has the least amount of like true humor. But yeah, the dark humor really comes out in Midsommar, and then in Beau, it's just everywhere.
Yeah. And I mean, and I think, or we'll talk about some of the performances coming up, but there's some people who in Beau Is Afraid really bring a comedic background, and you almost can't ignore what they're trying to do with their characters. So basically, he embarked on a career in the film industry while he was a student at the American Film Institute. He wrote and directed 2 short horror films that were deemed very revolutionary for the time they were made. It was The Strange Thing About the Johnsons
Munchausen?
and Munchausen.
Which is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
I was just going to say Munchausen, which I know Munchausen by proxy is the idea of like making your like child sick so they are attached to you, which Beau Is Afraid, I feel that DNA is there. And also, I was just going to say Hereditary, a movie that reminds me a lot of, and I'm not talking quality-wise, just content-wise, is The Sixth Sense, which also has a Munchausen by proxy plotline in it.
Yep.
Oh, really? Interesting. Because, yeah, man, that is a very repetitive theme. Yeah, and something that's very prevalent in that. And
just like the optics and the metaphor around that sort of sickness just feels ingrained in all his movies. The person you love is making you sick, but being nurturing.
It goes back to the subversion and the deviation of family values.
Yeah.
Right? Like in Munchausen, it's the mom. We don't have to go too far into it, but basically the mom is poisoning her kid because the kid is about to go off to college and she doesn't want to lose him or be alone. So she's poisoning him to make him sick so he can't leave. And then you have to deal with the ramifications of that as a parent. So it flows into the overarching theme of like, what if your family sucks?
yeah, I mean, look, the through line throughout a lot of these movies too, I think we see it less in Midsommar, but it sounds like kind of came around here. Ari Aster clearly did not have a healthy relationship with his mother. Like, I think the group thread we even came up with while we were talking about these movies is Ari Aster hates his mom. And you can see a lot of that stress and that anxiety more in Hereditary and especially Beau Is Afraid, which sort of puts it front and center and on full display. But yeah, I mean, there's clearly some kind of background, whether or not there was ever physical trauma involved. I'm sure there was enough mental or emotional trauma. So originally in childhood, he had aspirations of becoming an author and became interested in filmmaking through the idea of screenwriting. But yeah, it wasn't until he hit college and had made these 2 short films that he really considered going into a film career. And he became obsessed with horror films as a child and frequently rented them from video stores, later saying, I just exhausted the horror section of every video store I could find. I didn't know who to assemble or how to assemble people who would cooperate on something like that. So I just found myself writing screenplays for the things I wanted to make. And inevitably, these 2 short films that he made got him under the scope of A24, who wanted to obviously capitalize on the idea that, hey, you clearly have a very unique take on what you're doing. So that led him to creating Hereditary. But before I move on to that, do you guys have anything else you want to say about his other short films?
I mean, The Strange Thing About the Johnsons, that was his like thesis for his graduation at AFI. And that one, I mean, that one in particular is another twisted family dynamic. I don't know if you guys were able to find that one at all or any synopsis of that one, but basically we don't need to go too far into it because it's pretty messed up. But it again just emphasizes the subversion of the family dynamic in a twisted, dark way. And the way that one does it in particular is the son is raping his dad.
Ooh.
And the dad doesn't know how to handle it because he wants a relationship with his son, but he doesn't want to like out his kid. And then not only is the son raping the dad for a long time, but he like writes a book about it and wants to like show this with the world. And the mom is like checked out because she doesn't know how to handle it. But it all goes back to like, what if your family sucks? What are, the core values of family support? And if you were to turn that upside down, what does that do to a person? And that, I think you can really see where that built into Hereditary, into Midsommar, into Beau Is Afraid, in different ways, but still kind of maintains that through line.
Yeah, absolutely. God, he just has a twisted mind, huh? Like,
yeah.
Which is crazy because like he has that side of him, but then he's like got this weird dark goofball energy too, where like I watched it was like the turtle head, and then it was about like a displaced person who's just yelling at the screen. It was a very Scorsese, C'est la vie, which was giving me real like early Scorsese vibes. Those two definitely had like the Beau Is Afraid feelings, where it was like this dark comedy that's extremely heightened. One's like a gumshoe detective that's like super horny. He's like, I can't think of the actor's name, but he looks like he could be a Murray, like an elder statesman Murray. He looks like Brian Doyle Murphy. But it definitely, I could see the connection, but I was not seeing the Hereditary and Midsommar in those films. But based on what you said, it sounds like the short films you watched had more of that in them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Looks like Bradley Fisher is the name of that actor you're thinking of.
The old guy?
Yeah.
And you've seen him in everything?
Yeah, he's in Beau Is Afraid.
He is.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Which is also funny because he did also have a short called Beau, which was the inspiration directly for the movie Beau Is Afraid. We'll talk a little bit more about the parallels between those two. Because it starred an actor who unfortunately passed away back in 2019. But I mean, going from any film school actor to getting Joaquin Phoenix, obviously, you're going to be leveling up your game quite a bit. But inevitably, yeah, his short films led him to creating Hereditary. He originally pitched this as a family tragedy and was careful not to call it a horror film outright. In fact, I think his original thought process, and we talked a little bit about this off pod, was that he wanted to make just a family drama.
Right. The marketing took care of the horror aspect.
Yeah. And it very much is a family drama. And he was a fan of domestic dramas, incorporating a lot of themes of the genre into his script. He kind of envisioned a film that was very rooted in like family dynamics, the ideas of dealing with grief and trauma, citing Carrie, the Stephen King adaptation, and a movie called The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, which actually was the one that I think he pointed to as like his major inspiration.
Yeah, that movie, whenever he talks about movies, always comes up.
And I've never even heard of that movie before reading about it here. But a 1989 crime drama that had Dumbledore himself, Michael Gambon, in it.
I was going to say Richard Harris.
No. If it had Richard Harris, yeah, I'd be probably running to check it out. It also had Dame Helen Mirren in it.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
So, I mean, obviously something that impacted him a lot, but he interpreted his film, though, as two halves, which are completely inextricable from each other. It was his quote, "It begins as a family tragedy and then continues down that path, but gradually curdles into a full-bore nightmare," which I don't think you could put it any better than that. Because it's really, I think we can start talking about Hereditary now on itself, but is just, it kind of presents itself as just sort of a very dour tale, and you can kind of see this family is not right. The connections just all seem sort of distant from one another, and all of a sudden, yeah, it gets around the third act, the things kind of go haywire.
Go a little off. They go a little off path. A little off path.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is one where, it originally did not do well. It was not well reviewed when it first came out in theaters, and I think a big part of that was because, to your point, Fred, the marketing really played up the horror aspects
It
of the
looked
movie.
like a Blumhouse movie.
It
Yeah,
just-
I mean,
yeah.
it really played up the third act without giving anything away. When you watch the movie, like the full 2/3 of it are, there really isn't any like supernatural thing happening yet. It's a lot of slow build, but there's just this overwhelming sense of dread and like anxiety and tension that he builds from literally the first shot. And
Yeah.
when you guys were talking about some of the blocking and the cinematography, literally the sequence that I first thought of was the opening shot in Hereditary, because they do the zoom in, they're going through Annie's workshop, and showing all the miniature models and everything, but every single shot in that entire sequence is either slightly off kilter, so it's tilted, which distorts your vision, or the subject of the shot is not perfectly centered, so it's off to one side or off to a corner or anything like that. And there's literally nothing happening. There's no one in the room. It's empty. You're just being panned through with the camera, but it's so unsettling just because of the way that it's shot. And from like literally moment one after the opening credits rolled, you're like, I'm in trouble. This is gonna be a ride. And it is. It really sets the tone right off the bat.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the initial trailers, I think you made a good point. The whole second third of the movie, which is the movie, I feel, is not shown in the trailers. It was very much, this is a creepy, disturbed girl movie.
Mhm.
That
Yeah,
was what the
yeah.
trailer made it look like, with the feels of the third act. Like,
Yeah.
that's what we're going to get. And it was just funny. Like, I went into it because I like movies like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
like I'm like, oh yeah, this is my usual garbage bread and butter, and just getting this movie instead was such a surprise.
Yeah, where it's a movie, which is funny that the third sequence or the third of the movie is such a kind of that traditional, like sort of like supernatural horror element film, because throughout most of it, you're like, is any of this even real? Like, is this all just tricks and like people are not seeing things? Because you're already questioning almost every family member's sanity except for the dad, because he's just
Gabriel Brune's doing like the yeoman's work of that movie, just like steady hand.
yeah.
I feel so bad for the guy because he's trying to like keep a handle on this spiraling situation, and it just does not pan out at all for him.
Certainly not for him, no.
No.
I just definitely felt bad he didn't get anything real juicy to do, because he's the kind of actor you can give something juicy to, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, I mean, yeah, you look back at him in The Usual Suspects, and it's like you're convinced for a while he's Kaiser Soze. Like you're like,
Yeah.
this is who this guy is, and then only for everything to get flipped around, and we don't have to get onto all the Usual Suspects. There's a lot of icky people involved in that movie, but
Icky People, the movie.
yeah, really.
Well, we could just talk about End of Days, where he plays the devil.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, I think in casting him too, you kind of play off this set notion that there's something not right about him and that maybe he's involved somehow. But really, it's just like, and what he does such a great job at is convincing you that, no, I am literally just a guy here. And then the only moment that you really question is when he's not telling Annie, his wife, about the fact that her mom's grave was desecrated, because he clearly was trying to protect her feelings. But
Right.
so he just realized this is a very delicate situation and shit's not going well.
Yeah. And from the get-go, I feel like with this movie and all his movies, you kind of see the Ari Aster thing, which I think he does these like horror motifs, metaphors, whatever you want to call them, and then he like instills like a reality version of it, where the big plot of Hereditary is she had this mom who was controlling, who wanted to control her kids. the opening shot of Hereditary is her building these models that she can control.
Yeah.
After we're getting into it, daughter gets decapitated. What does she
Mhm.
do? She has to control and make
Build
the
a model.
diorama. It's not a diorama, whatever, the model of
The
that.
miniature.
The
Yes.
miniature, yeah.
And the miniatures are, first of all, they're stunning. Like, and part of the reason that opening sequence you're mentioning works so well, Nick, is because literally every detail of these miniatures, they made a like detail for detail duplicate of the set that they built for the house. So as you're zooming in, you're like, oh, this is unsettling. Everything's kind of off kilter. Suddenly somebody walks in the room of what you assume is a dollhouse.
Yep.
And you're like, how the hell did they do that?
Yeah.
And that's when I knew we were cooking. I remember being in the theater, seeing that, being like, hell yes.
Yeah. And I mean, you think it's a magic eye trick, but no, it was just very clever cutting.
Yeah.
And he is such a director that is not afraid to use stillness to instill like tension in a moment. And it's all throughout. I mean, Hereditary does it better than any. I think we see it a lot in Midsommar too, but there is just, he's not afraid to let somebody sit and stare out at nothing for a minute solid. And you're just thinking like, what is going through this person's head?
There's a lot of lingering shots, but to go back to like Ari and his master tension building, none of those lingering shots ever go too far to where, because if they go too far, now you're actually relieving some of that tension because nothing's happening. It's a perfect balance of, it's not a quick cut and it's just long enough that you're like, what is happening?
Mhm.
And just when you're like, is anything going to happen? Then it cuts to something else and it's building tension through the next shot.
Yeah.
He only stays on it when it's uncomfortable, which is like the Toni Collette cutting her head off is a beat too long.
Jesus. Yeah.
Like it stays longer than you want it to. That's when he stretches it out. Or there's like a scene in Beau Is Afraid when the naked guy stabs him a bunch of times.
Yep.
That goes a few seconds too long.
Yep.
But I think it plays with what you're talking about, the tension moments that cut away perfectly. And then he leaves you in the shitty part.
Yeah. And I'm, as soon as you said the Toni Collette cutting her head off with a friggin' piano wire, there's like 2 or 3 squelches that are like very obviously extra. And it just, that was a part that like on my second watch, I almost had completely forgotten that part happened.
Yeah.
And then you see it again, you're like, oh my God, that's unsettling. And she's like making eye contact with the camera. Oh, yeah.
And he's doing the thing that people do later with films. Like the scene I think about is in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the scene where Brad Pitt goes to the Spalding Ranch. And that scene is like a horror tension scene.
Mhm.
I feel Ari Aster with his first film was like, oh, if I were to do horror, it'd be fantastic. It'd be like this and be pitch perfect. That's not really what I'm interested in. But if I was going to do it, it'd be perfect like this.
Yeah.
And that's like the last 20, 30 minutes of Hereditary. And that made me think of this, like people who ask like Tarantino to do horror movies. Like, oh, I could do that and I could do it perfectly. Here's an example, but that's not what I want to do.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's just, and I think it's the great trick that he's even playing this entire movie is like almost like just imbuing like little horror elements throughout without even letting you really know that it's kind of a horror movie until really it turns into a full bore horror movie. And I think to kind of summarize, the way that this story goes, because we start, you said we're talking about like it's Toni Collette's character, like she's at the funeral for her mother, giving the dissertation, or not the dissertation, the service. Eulogy, thank you. And and then as they get back, you can tell that there's something not right with this family, and mostly with the daughter. And Fred already kind of dived into this because the daughter just seems like she's something it's just not right with her. She's very quiet. She's very disassociated from reality. And
Loves tree houses.
loves tree houses,
building little dolls.
cutting heads off birds. Yeah. And I mean, she's the typical creepy little girl. And one of the things that the trailer did well, you were like, oh, the trailer really made it look good. It made it look like she was going to be in this whole movie.
Right.
Until, we hit a scene where she goes to a party with her brother who, she got tailed along or got forced to tag along because he's like, you got to go do it. You got to go socialize. And lo and behold, has like allergic reaction to a nuts that we established earlier in the movie. She's allergic to. Brother's driving home high, and she's trying to gasp for air, and swerves, hits a pole, knocks her head off. And that is a scene that I wanted to end like immediately. And no, we're gonna sit with every single thought that Alex Wolff is having. His character of Peter is just sitting there at the wheel, coming to grasp what he just did. And oh my God, I just remember in the theater, like my jaw dropped, and I think it stayed open for 20 minutes. I was like, I cannot believe this just happened. I can't believe we're just stuck, like having to, like, I felt so bad for that character.
And the kid that plays Peter, I can't think of his name.
Alex Wolff. Yeah.
He plays it perfectly because, like, yes, he's high, but at the same time, he's coherent enough to like know what happened. And just the shot of him sitting in the car and the panic on his face, but he's frozen, and the little fleeting like eye movement to the rear view mirror, and he can't even like look because he knows he heard it. Like, he knows what happened. He knows she's dead because she's also not gasping for air anymore.
Yeah.
He knows, and he just can't even bring himself to like have a sustained gaze into the back seat. And then he like drives home and doesn't tell anyone and just goes to bed. Like, just the performance of the shutdown of PTSD, it's mind-blowing. It's so good.
And we get our first of many of like anguish crying, like, which I feel like Beau, I don't remember Beau has one. That's a long movie, but I feel like he's got that in at least the first two. Just someone like on the ground, fully just like full emotion crying.
Yeah.
And it's the most upsetting thing with like a score pounding and just
First of many decapitations we see in these movies too,
which are actually foreshadowed. It's funny you say that because there's one, going back to the score, Ari was doing an interview and he said basically that throughout the entire score there is a sub bass level tone that is almost inaudible, but it causes a physical reaction of like unease as you're hearing it, which is also why it's better in theaters. But that is throughout basically the entire movie of Hereditary, that it comes and goes, but it's the whole time. And they are specifically using the music to like just mess with you. And the whole like cult manipulation, who's doing it? Is Annie sleepwalking? Is it the cult? Like, all of that going around and around and around of what is happening to these people until it finally comes out. But it's the pacing is fantastic.
It's also very much, I feel, a spiritual sequel to Rosemary's Baby. I feel that's the movie. He really gives me 70s horror in Hereditary, I feel. I mean, a little bit of Midsommar, too. I feel, trying to think when the original Not the Beast came out. The Christopher Lee.
The Wicker Man.
The Wicker Man. Like, that's definitely the feel of Midsommar, but the first, Hereditary definitely to me feels like Rosemary's Baby, and the ending is a very similar ending, too.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely got the staple of cult films, and we'll definitely talk about the cult and the real use of like demonology and like, you know, like mythic arts from like history in this movie, which I think makes it a little more disturbing. Like, that was kind of a rabbit hole I fell down finally after this one.
Any sort of movie where they're like, okay, there's this demon called Shagoo and he's the worst. Any movie that does that, I'm like, I'm scared.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because then it starts to get into, I mean, you start to feel like, oh, wait, this doesn't feel so fictional in a way, which, I mean, yes, it is and it isn't, right? It's like, it's somebody believed it at one point. It's like believing, though, they're like Zeus existed. But I think where we definitely get into the real meat of this movie is definitely after the daughter's death, because that's when we see Toni Collette, who was mourning, but you could tell really didn't miss her mom. Maybe the first hint we get in a feature-length film that, like, okay, maybe things weren't so great with Ari and his mother, but then we see this mother mourn so deeply for her daughter, who she really didn't have a good relationship with.
But maybe that's why she mourned her even more.
Yeah. There's a lot of regret, a lot of like I mean, and I think that's another theme we see throughout all three of these movies. And I think it's a good chance to start really putting pins in a lot of the things we're going to keep revisiting is that, as much as that, it's people that you get close to who are kind of poisoning you, right? But it's also people that it's like, God, if I had just done things differently, this could have been a really good thing. And it's so sad, especially a young daughter who is only 13 in the movie to die at that point.
And there's something really scary about, if you put yourself in Alex Wolff, the son's shoes post the sister dying, just the idea of like, and another theme that's going to come up in other movies is like saying, hey, I know I messed up to my mom, and your mom just not quite buying it and blaming you.
Yeah.
Like she blames him, whether she kind of outright does say it towards the end, but from the get-go at that first dining scene where like he says, what about
they
you,
blow
Mom?
up at each other.
Yeah, like from that moment on, you can see she has these awful feelings towards her son, which is unsettling and scary because it's the subversion of the family dynamic. Your mother is someone that you're supposed to have comfort from, and this is not the case. And I don't know, to me as being, I'm a died in the root mother's boy, like my dad passed away when I was 10 and my brother went to school overseas, so it was just me and my mom. And there's things in these movies that I have a great awesome relationship with my mom, but because he's heightening these things that I think a lot of people go through, I see those things and they're heightened and I'm like, oh God, I'm scared. I can relate. And I think it's similar when I talk about Sopranos. Like, I am not like those people, but when you see them have similar sufferings and similar things you're going through, you're like, oh, I'm relating to this awful thing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's just playing on family dynamics that maybe or maybe you don't recognize too. And I know at least for myself, and I know Nick, you as well, we have sisters, and it's like imagining going through a traumatic event where it's like, clearly there was no malintent involved. It was just a fuck up. But it's like, but now it's like you have to wear this whole like burden for the rest of your life that you murdered your only sibling. And
Right.
I mean, like you even think about it for a moment, and it's just like it's enough to just like make you feel.
And you can have that
awful.
guilt because you were high, and whether or not that is why she died, you were
It
at the
impacted
time,
it,
and so you're gonna think about that,
Right.
Well, and he's already suffering from PTSD before that even happens because his mother tried to kill him while she was sleepwalking.
Right.
So like there's this whole like passed on inherited trauma and the inevitability of what's happening to these people. And I think actually just the title of Hereditary goes a long way in cementing like the horror of not having control over your predetermined fate, because hereditary, it's inherited. You don't get a choice. Like
Yeah.
if you the traits you bring on from your parents, they're ingrained or they're genetic, so you really don't have a choice. And from the title, just the get-go, the jump, Ari's like, yeah, these people are screwed, they don't know it, and there's absolutely nothing that they can do about it.
Yeah.
So
And that's the thing, is the abstract thought of it and the precise Hereditary, what you get from your parents, and also you're getting a demon, literally. That's the Ari Aster bread and butter, I feel, is like the big abstract thought, and then we're also going to do it in reality too.
Yeah.
And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but as you're going through with Hereditary and you're looking back at kind of this family dynamic, and you're looking at like little bits on second and third watches that I finally picked up on, was like, oh, this mom is not Annie, but the matriarch, the dead grandma at the beginning. She's tried this like possession ritual before, and it caused Annie's brother to kill himself.
Yeah.
And she sunk her claws into Charlie, the little sister played by Millie Shapiro. And there's actually, like, the more you watch it, the more you look at it, there's this theory that the demon is actually already in Charlie and was put there by the grandmother. And one of the reasons why the third act is so messed up is there's a byline in the little book that's talking about the demon, that if he's not given a male host, he becomes vengeful and violent, and that he's been stuck in Charlie for years, which is why she likes building dolls, which is why her head is on one of those giant dolls at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And it's why she's a little weird and why she's quiet and why she doesn't
Yeah.
really fit in anywhere. And her death sets the entire rest of the movie in motion because it starts the possession ritual.
Well, yeah, and I think there's something that's, I think, tragic about that too, that this little girl never even was really given a chance to be a little girl. She was always, and I think that's kind of the case with all the children coming down from that grandmother. Nobody was ever really themselves. Once Annie's brother died, the mom, like her brother, suddenly it was like, no, you got to have kids. I need
Yeah.
you to give me a boy so that they can put this demon in the body. And then obviously she didn't want the grandma to anywhere near him. Rightfully so. Had the instinct of like, you're going to do something terrible to my son. You're not going to get anywhere near him. So of course she's going to take the next one and do the next, whatever she can. And it's terrible to think that like, yeah, it even started from the top. This mom was already sowing these terrible seeds for a fortune that she was never going to actually like enjoy, right? Like, and that's kind of, it's the tragic kind of twist of fate. It's all these other followers that get the benefit from it. But I don't know. It's kind of crazy just because you think you have a handle on the story and it just keeps twisting and telling you. When Ann Dowd comes in the second act, you're like, and here is somebody who is like, here, I'm a helpful person. I'm a shoulder to cry on. Somebody who looks like the most legitimately like supportive person is actually the person doing the most harm of anybody.
Someone you met in a support group.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, and he's instilling these feelings of like, you can't even support or you can't even trust the people that you're supposed to be turning to at the time if you can't trust your family. Like, who can you trust? It's like, no, you're doomed. Like you said, like it's kind of written in stone and we're here.
It's interesting watching the movie because, you know, the audience knows what Annie knows and their family, and we piece it together along with the family, and the whole movie is structured like this family is the sacrificial lambs. They don't know it and you don't know it until it's inescapable. And there are outside forces controlling everything that they're going through until, you know, this King Paimon is finally released.
Yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned the beheadings, decapitations, and in the little book where, you know, she's flipping through pages and that's where it introduces this King Paimon as a demon. He's riding, I think it's a camel, but attached to his belt is a strap with 3 heads. And there are 3 decapitations in the movie, and it starts with Charlie, the daughter. There is the cult's symbol is carved into the post that she hits her head on, and the deer that's in the road is obviously placed there. And then eventually they find the body of the grandmother, also decapitated.
Yep.
And then the final decapitation is Toni Collette, which she does herself while possessed by Paimon.
Yeah.
So it's that there's a lot that, like, there is a fine web that Ari Aster is weaving throughout this movie that all pays off in the last, 10 minutes.
Yeah. You don't really even realize too that that's what's going on. I mean, because we really do dive into when she meets Ann Dowd, we see her go through these whole motions of like, well, she's acknowledging she's had these sleepwalking episodes and like she doesn't even feel right in the head and like she feels guilty about all these things. So you're really questioning whether she's a reliable narrator because we see so much from Annie's perspective until it does switch to Peter. And suddenly we kind of see, okay, maybe there's a little more going on that we didn't know about.
Yep.
So it does get revealed out and out that it was actually a cult that was trying to raise Paimon and Paimon.
Hail Paimon!
That's right. Yeah, everybody's doing their little hails at the end.
Very much like Rosemary's Baby.
Indeed. Man, it really is an interesting parallel between those two.
They're both slow burns that end with like the coming of a Satan or demon.
Yeah. And man, there's just something, it's just so unsettling once the curtain is pulled back all the way because, you really don't know what we're seeing, but there's just those still frames. You see these followers kind of like strolling throughout the house, the smiling guy.
Oh, the smiling guy.
His smiling dude in the closet, and oh my god,
Just
and
stark naked.
but his face is lit up in just the perfect way that it's the like flashlight at a campfire kind of thing.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, that makes me think there's like an early scare where after the grandmother died, that Tony Collette's just in a room, and I think she like turns out a light, and you just see the grandmother in the corner for a hot second, which the way he shoots it looks like a trick of your eye.
Yeah.
Like, and it is frightening.
Yeah. And I think
I got goosebumps. Look at him. Look at him.
I see them. They're real.
They are real.
I mean, who hasn't had that moment in their life where you turn on a light and you think you see somebody standing in the room and it's like, oh, it's just a sweatshirt.
That pile of clothes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I've definitely had moments of had to jump in the middle of the night, but it turns out to be nothing. But yeah, I think it's something that, we only get a tease of these spiritual elements because Sandow teaches her how to like summon the dead, right? She summons her grandson, and he's drawing on the chalkboard. And then she thinks she's summoning Charlie into the house that is Annie now. And it's like, and suddenly, it really gets into, okay, now we're moving into full on supernatural horror. Yeah, until we get this crazy ending. And it's almost jarring to realize it was that all along, right? Because you're like, what? Like it was a cult? There's plenty of clues throughout. And you can definitely see it on the second way through. But even still, I remember the first time being like, that was it. It was people manipulating the situation.
And I keep comparing it. It's very much to me like The Sixth Sense, where you rewatch it and like all the little clues are there that you can follow, and there's like almost like a rule to the movie.
Yeah, and you're like, oh yeah, it's right there the whole time.
Yeah, the smiling guy is at the funeral.
Yeah. And I mean, it is like a magic trick where he wants you to look at one thing throughout the whole movie so that you don't see what's right in front of you.
Yep.
Which is something that we do see in Midsommar. So Hereditary modestly grossed $44 million at the US and Canadian box office, but ultimately made $82 million worldwide.
Budget of like 20, I would guess.
Budget of $10 million.
What?
So after that, Mr. Aster was pretty much given a little bit of a blank check, as other podcasts like to call it.
Which ones?
I mean,
we can't say.
It's in the name potentially. So, in May 2018, it was announced after the release of Hereditary, or I'm sorry, this was even before that Ari Aster would write and direct the movie Midsommar, with Lars Knudsen serving as producer from Be Real Films, which was a Swedish company, and was producing the film alongside Square Peg with A24 back to distribute. So after Hereditary had been a big critical success and made over $80 million, which is pretty dang good for a $10 million budget.
Right.
Right. Like, I mean, I think you had all the marks you were going to see of like, we're ready to give this guy another go. It was A24's highest grossing film worldwide at that time. So, I mean,
they've got a backlog too. Like A24's got a lot of good movies.
I mean, A24, I think, is now a prestige name. It's what Miramax was.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the day. And it's hopefully without the crappy people at the top. So according to Aster, he had been approached by Be Real executive Martin Karlqvist and Patrick Anderson to helm a slasher film set in Sweden, which is an idea he initially rejected as he felt that he had no way into the story. But he ultimately devised a plot in which the two central characters are experiencing relationship tensions verging on a breakup, and wrote the surrounding screenplay around that theme. He described the result as a breakup movie dressed in the clothes of a folk horror film. Aster has mentioned the 1981 film Modern Romance as an inspiration for Midsommar, and called it the Wizard of Oz for perverts.
All right.
Let that one sink in for a second. He worked with the production designer to develop the film's folklore elements and the traditions of the Harga while visiting Helsinki, and together they researched some of these like centuries old farms that typically had paintings on the walls, and developed a stylized version for the set for this May Day celebration or whatever, the Midsummer celebration that was in Sweden and German and English folklore, which is something he really starts to dive into, I think, as well in Beau Is Afraid. Like we start to see some of those same seeds can carry on. He also researched spiritual movements and communities, saying that he particularly drew inspiration from Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy and the theosophy.
That makes sense because, like, aren't they all the guys anthropologists?
They're all grad students, right? Like they're
Yeah.
writing their thesis. The guy, William Harper, Josh is the character. Chidi from The Good Place.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
He's, specifically wants to write his thesis on the Harga as an anthropological or, a study of these people. And it all goes wrong.
Now, what do you guys think about this movie?
This one is interesting to me because where Hereditary was, there's a lot of dark, there's a lot of, very blue tones early on that shift to red tones once the demon is out, and the supernatural in Hereditary, all of that is kind of completely juxtaposed in Midsommar, right? Like it's bright and shiny, it's gorgeous setting, it's outside, it's there's flowers everywhere. There really isn't like a supernatural aspect. Like they're praying to their deity and there's a spiritual nature to the cult, the Harga, but there's not like a demon pulling the strings. This is just like, it's kind of a backhanded review or allegory for religion in general. It's also plays on the twisted nuclear family, codependence, manipulation via emotional override or support. So it fits his overarching themes. It's gorgeous. It's a beautiful movie. And it's still dread, terror, horrifying scenes, a lot of foreshadowing. He literally tells you exactly what the entire movie is going to be with the mural in each part. And I personally I'm challenged by the ending because I know it's, to your point, Tom, earlier, it's supposed to appear positive because of the smile on Florence Pugh's face, which she's fantastic. But at the end of the day, you have to realize that she just killed all of her friends and is now indoctrinated into a murder cult. So like she lives, but
But considering where she started the movie,
Some friends, I'd say.
yeah,
they're absolutely awful.
I mean, yeah. So they are anthropology student, which is leads to why I couldn't pronounce the word anthroposophy because I wasn't used to seeing it written like that. But I mean, yeah, I think the thing that you noted on, Nick, is that Midsommar really zigs where Hereditary zagged, right? Yeah. It's like it tries to be the complete like photo negative of that movie in both that you almost expect a lot of the similar things that Hereditary did, and the movie kind of shows you throughout that it's like, oh, it's none of that, it's none of that, only for it to be at the end and you realize, oh, it was a cult trying to murder them all.
The whole time.
Which there is something about, I think, another theme in that what harm a group of people can do to the world when they all are aligned on a cause, which, we've never seen that in real life. I mean,
Yep. It's a deviant form of the family support system.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you have to go from the start, though, to kind of see where the movie evolves, because we do see like literally a family torn asunder immediately out the gate, where we see Florence Pugh's Danny realizes something's wrong with her sister. She's gotten all the warning signs. She calls her parents, like the right thing to do, only to realize it's too late. Like, everything is already set in motion. Her sister has performed a very awful way to commit suicide and kill her parents in the process.
Yeah, she kills them by gas, and then she spends the rest of the movie being gaslit by her boyfriend.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, yeah, he does. He's kind of a dick.
I didn't tell you about that, babe. I'm pretty sure I told you about that.
Oh, it was your birthday? I'm totally sorry about it. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's times, even in my life, not necessarily my current relationship, although obviously you have moments, but that I felt like a bad significant other. But this guy really makes you realize, maybe that wasn't so bad.
I mean, I on the second watch, I wanted to give him a little bit more benefit of the doubt, because he's going to break up with her and then her family dies and he can't go through with it anymore. And then you watch it again, you're like, no, you're just an asshole. You're completely emotionally barren. You're manipulative. It's just not a good situation.
Yeah. I mean, you almost realize then, by removing the rest of her family from her life right out the gate in this movie, she's left with somebody who she's relying to support on, who is maybe the worst person she could have relied on. But yeah, I think to just sunlight, some feelings on it, I think based on what I expected from Hereditary, I expected a lot of things to be different. And I think at first when I watched this, I was a little disappointed, and because I was like, I was expecting maybe something a little different. But then I think on the second watch, I was able to appreciate the movie a little more for what it was. And it is a beautiful movie. You're absolutely right. Now, what were your feelings on it, Fred?
Yeah, I think I still can't decide whether it's my second or third favorite. I think Hereditary is just pretty tight.
Yeah.
And I love that about it. But I think it's his best shot and best looking movie by far. And it is a movie that I can throw on, and even though it is dark, it just looks so damn good that I can just enjoy it, sort of. And I really think it's got my favorite scene in Ari Aster movie, which is when she finds out and she's crying and her shitty boyfriend's consoling her, and it pans out and then the snow hits and then it's got this music, the score kicks in.
Yeah.
And I don't know, to me, that was just some of the best filmmaking I've seen in all three of his films, just the way it kicks in like that. And it's just very intense.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's such a devastating movie in so many parts. And I think what really gets you, and we talked about the low tone in Hereditary, the sounds all throughout this movie, even beyond the score, the rhythmic echoing that the community that they visit does with people. It's so haunting, but in a way it's kind of pretty.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's what's so unsettling about it. It's they're making these kind of very harmonic noises, and you realize there's sort of some sadness behind some of them and sort of deviousness behind them.
Yeah, he uses a different composer for this one. I know Hereditary and Beau Is Afraid, I believe, had the same composer. And in this one, he used someone else. I think there is really some nice melodic stuff in Hereditary.
Yeah,
that's how Ari Aster likes him called, right? So tell me more about two.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the one was something good, but two, oh man, let's talk about that composer. It was Midsommar composer. His name is Bobby Krillick, aka the Haxan Cloak.
Ooh.
All right.
I know, man. You got
Composer's got a nickname.
feeling yourself if you got a name. It's not even a DJ name. It's the Haxan Cloak. It's my Swedish impression.
So he did Hereditary?
That was Midsommar.
Oh, he did Midsommar.
The Hereditary composer's name is Colin Stetson.
Yeah.
And the Beau Is Afraid composer is also same one as Midsommar.
Oh, I had it mixed up. So 2 and 3 have the same
The
composer.
Haxan Cloak was back. Get in.
Which it's I always thought he had the same guy for all 3 films. I thought they're kind of similar scores, but it was interesting to find out he mixed it up.
No, it was interesting because I think I read that Colin Stetson on Hereditary was hired 2 years before production even began, because he just loved his music so much and was like, I need this. And he worked with him on the score well before the movie was even filmed, so that he kind of had an idea of what he was even dealing with going in, which is totally backwards, because it was when you have Star Wars, you got George Lucas kind of handing John Williams these scenes like, here, I need something kind of symphonic and loud sounding.
I need a noise that you can't hear that makes you feel sad. It's kind of like the brown note, but for emotions.
Yeah. I don't want people shitting in the theater.
Yeah. Oh, God. I mean, some people might have shit themselves
I
at a
mean-
couple of these things. But yeah, I mean, going back to Midsommar and getting back to the moments, I mean, there are so many times when there's the absence of the score that kind of sits with you. And then when the score kicks in, you're just sort of like in a whirlwind. And I think his feeling of calling it like the Wizard of Oz for perverts is such an interesting way, because
Yeah.
you do kind of feel like that between the beginning and the end, from Fred talking about the scene in the snow and the darkness to all of a sudden this bright green
Yeah.
country. I don't know.
And there's drugs.
Mhm.
And there's drugs.
And I love the visualizations they use with the like hallucinogenics, how they like seed it in later in the movie. Like if her headdress with flowers are like pulsing at times, and it's just this little effect.
Well, and then there's also like there's the image of her sister wearing the mask in the trees as she's being crowned as the May Queen, and then like right before she's wearing the full cloak, she like hallucinates seeing her sister in the crowd of the Harga. And like things like that just stick through like
and her mom.
And her mom,
Yeah, like walks by. Yeah.
It just sticks through the entire throughway. So there's always that backdrop of like, how much is the LSD? How much is really murder cults?
Yeah. But I think what we kind of see throughout, there's not so much of us suspecting spiritual, like, what am I saying? Hijinks. This one.
Yeah.
It's more that you kind of realize something's wrong, but everybody's so gosh darn nice that they talk to. They're like, this person couldn't possibly be a killer. This person couldn't possibly be wanting these things to happen. They're just like, oh, we just dropped them off at the train station. Because I mean, the first devastating thing, I mean, once they get to Sweden, and it's kind of this whole thing where, he doesn't tell his bros until she's coming up to the apartment. They're like, hey, I invited her to Sweden, but she's not coming, you guys. Like, she said yes, but she's not coming.
Super cool and obnoxiously beautiful Florence Pugh's not going to come. Okay, guys, don't worry.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that whole scene, like in the apartment where they're all sitting on the couch, going back to the cinematography and the blocking of the shot, it's very separated where they're all on the couch. She's in the chair on the other side, and she's framed in the mirror as by herself, like in the front. And it's very like juxtaposition between there's them and there's Florence Pugh, and there's no cross.
Yeah.
And she's the outsider in this group. She's not really welcome. But her dick boyfriend is like bringing her along.
Yeah, she's isolated before she goes overseas.
Yeah.
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 And I mean, and it is such a wild journey for Florence Pugh's character, because she is constantly feeling like, oh, it's me. I'm the one making him like this. I'm pushing too hard. When she's talking to her friend on the phone, like, oh, I know I shouldn't push him like this, though. I'm trying to make him break up with me. And it's like, listen, like, there's no such thing as that. Like, he's either a person you can lean on or he's not.
Yeah.
Like, and it's just such, I mean, and it's like a devastating thing, because she's having this conversation even before her family dies, that she's thinking about this. And then it's like she's already has this inherent guilt that like, oh, I'm just a burden. And it's like, no, he's just a dick who's made you feel like a burden. And now you feel like a burden, even though you have the right to be more of a burden than any other time in your life.
Right.
I think it speaks a lot to like once they're in Sweden, things are already dysfunctional. But if there was any care from this friend group to Danny at all, you'd think that the person that just went through the trauma of having a sister commit suicide and murder your parents, hey, maybe don't go to the part of the ritual where the old people jump off a cliff.
Yeah.
Like the guy that plays Josh, Josh, the character, he knows what's going to happen. he knows what it is because he's studied the Harga.
Right.
And he's just standing back there, like smile on his face, like, watch this, guys. And just instant terror.
Right.
And you just see her drop. And I mean, how else would you react if you just lost your entire family?
Yeah. The character of Pele is so interesting to me, especially on the second time where you kind of seen how he's manipulated the circumstances to get him over there. Because the first time through, you feel like, oh, he's the one friend that sort of seems like he realizes something, obviously, like, oh, she's not okay. Like, and he's checking on her and he's trying to be nice to her. And he's like, you know what? Actually, you should come. And like, I'm glad you're coming.
Yep.
Because I think he knows this is kind of like the perfect situation for her. As just a person, is like, we're probably not going to sacrifice you. You're probably going to find the support that I think you can need.
You're going to join. Well, and that's the question is, does he know, or is he involved? Is he leading them to their demise? Or is he really just an idiot and he doesn't know?
Yeah, which I mean, we know the answer by the end, but obviously it's a great little tension pull because you really don't suspect him because he is so nice. Again, it's this whole thing of this, the Harga are such nice people that you're like, they couldn't possibly have bad intentions. And it's even like the most disturbing thing is like when at Christian at the end, and I know we're jumping ahead, but when he gets paralyzed and he's sitting in like the chair and the girl's opening his eyes like, oh, Christian, like, oh, you're awake. Oh, good. Like not realizing like, yeah, we're about to sentence you to your death. And we know that your girlfriend's going to let you go and die.
Gonna let you burn. Yeah.
But she's got a smile on her face. Like, oh, I'm glad you're all right. You know, it's like, oh,
and by the way, you're surrounded by your dead filleted friends.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it's like a cult of Mr. Rogers, just like
yeah, disarming.
Are you feeling okay today in the neighborhood?
Can we have a horror version of Mr. Rogers? I feel like that would actually play really well.
I was just thinking your Mr. Rogers kind of sounds like George W.
George
H.W. Bush.
H.W.
Yeah.
Now, rave my lips. Now, Mr. Rogers.
I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to put my sweater on.
Here come my shoes. Nope, not going to do it. Not going to do it. Somewhere Dana Carvey is crying. The crazy thing, though, with Midsommar, I think, is that there isn't anything hidden in shadow. Everything's hidden in plain sight. And we see that because it's all wide open spaces. And like, what a unique way to tell a horror story where it's setting it in the brightest like possible thing. It'd be like having like, it's almost like a beach murder, right? Of like, oh, here's this like beautiful paradise, but underneath there's bad things going on. And it's just like one by one, each of them disappear. And yet like people know things are wrong, but they're like, I think I'm in an okay circumstance. So maybe it's fine.
There's nowhere to hide the jump scare.
Right.
I mean, which kind of like just goes back to the Ari Aster brilliance in just building tension and dread. Because he still does it, even in like the brightest, sunniest, shiniest, happiest horror movie you could possibly watch.
Yeah. I don't know. I think there's something to be said for how he's able to kind of like mislead you even when we have the other couple. I completely forgot about the other couple that like Pele's brother brought over.
Yeah. Did you just like spread your arms like
Yeah.
I know. I've got the Italian part of me that's like I'm a hand speaker. And
so I thought you were imitating the one guy who gets
eagle thing that
yeah.
Oh,
and he's still alive.
And he's got his like lungs out his back.
Oh yeah. Well, I think I was kind of thinking about that.
You and I had the same thing. We're like, he did the thing.
I thought you guys
had
were
a
just
Leo moment.
Yes.
I
did the thing.
I thought you guys were noting how I keep knocking the mic because I keep the listening audience keeps hearing these little pings and they're like, what the hell is that? It's like, no, it's me being an idiot knocking my mic over and over as I'm gesturing at these two guys in the room. But yeah, I mean, there's these awful ways that these people die, and I think it's like, because I mean, there's really not a whole lot to the plot. We keep following this ceremony. We see these old people like commit suicide, and I think even in that context, it's presented in a way that like, yes, some of the people are horrified. Like Florence Pugh's Danny is horrified. The couple that Pelle's brother brings over are horrified. But at the end of the day, they're like, well, this is just their society. And they're like, you guys have to understand. These people were old. Like this was their journey. It came to an end. And in a way, you're almost sort of like gaslit into accepting that that's just their tradition.
Or just
Okay.
you accept the idea like, oh well, maybe if I was old and sickly, this might be the best choice. Like, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Or like, oh, I don't want to be a burden after I am so old I can't take care of myself anymore. Which I don't think either of those people who did that are at that point. But no.
Well, they all seem real svelte.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's a funny detail that you don't really notice because we constantly are seeing them. They're like, oh, we're having a 9-day feast, right? They're having this big old feast. Like, and something I noticed this time, and I finally read about it, the people in the Harga are not eating. Like they're dipping their forks into their food and they're just touching the tip to their mouths, but they're not actually eating. They're almost like performing some sort of almost like a hunger strike of sorts.
Like a fast. Before.
Yeah. And it's like, and when you don't look at it close enough, you don't realize that's what's happening until you kind of get to the end. You're like, oh, the feast is probably after the sacrificial ceremony takes place. And
Yep.
They order like Domino's after.
like, Danny, do you want something? Are you a Hawaiian pizza fan?
Yes. It matches your flowers.
Yeah, pineapple.
The wings are surprisingly good.
The wings coming out the guy's back are like, there is some very horrible tortures, but I think, and we can probably fast forward to the end because I mean, yeah, it's just a continuous cycling of events. Josh, played by William Jackson Harper, disappears. Mark, played by William Poulter, disappears. William Poulter is just a jackass, like snarky idiot who's very funny in this, but also, I mean,
Doesn't he get turned into like a human soccer ball, basically?
I thought he turned like a big dummy.
yeah.
Like they like stuff him or something.
Yeah, you're right.
And like
It's
the
other
kids
guy.
even like are playing a game called Skin the Fool.
Yeah,
and
that's
what
what it
happens
is.
is they
Yep.
kind of turn him into a big like stuffed doll. Yeah, until we ultimately realize, well, one, Christian's getting like seduced by Pelle's sister into this weird sex where he's surrounded by naked women. And like
So I saw Midsommar and Beau Is Afraid with my wife and her mother.
oh no.
Oof, that's rough.
Oh, just there's some sex scenes that I would never want to watch by myself, to be honest.
Yeah, just not at all.
Let alone with people that I interact with.
No.
Yeah, and the health code violations at that place.
Oh yeah, the PUBT
Or the puby pie.
or that. Yeah. Or yeah, I mean, Christian's basically raped because of a love drug.
Yep.
But Danny doesn't see it that way. And then the Harga, as the manipulative cult that they use that situation to further indoctrinate her with emotional smothering.
Yeah.
And that as the more you watch it, you're like, God, they really are planning like all of this.
Oh yeah. No, I mean they have clearly been building up to us. They present this barn that's in the back of the field as a temple, and only to realize, yeah, it's a sacrificial altar essentially for where they're going to put 9 people in there and basically burn them alive or dead. I mean, in most cases they were dead, and except for the couple that were left alive, including Christian. Which at that point you start to feel a little bad for him, but you're also like, you kind of brought this on yourself.
And he's kind of doing the thing where, like, we've talked about how these subvert horror movies, but also he's doing the horror movie thing. All the assholes got theirs.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a slasher thing.
Yeah, and sewed into a bear skin. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, he's an asshole. He's definitely way dead. But to your point about the subversion, like just the way that you get there, like you don't even really realize that you got there until you're there.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just it's an emotional roller coaster, and you were even just watching this and you're like, oh, it's wincing. I mean, you can't imagine as being like paralyzed, unable to move, and being stuck in this barn as people are being like just burned alive or dead. Yeah. Like, I mean,
And that scene with the one guy who's like, because there's like the willing sacrifices and the people who are there, and they're given some like whatever, the poppy, I think. I don't know if it's that, but it's that idea where they are numbed.
Yeah,
But then all of a sudden it hits him and he just starts screaming.
Yeah.
And I was just upsetting.
very upsetting because then everybody else outside is yelling with him and screaming with him.
There's
that's-
empathy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's just there's something about like the most unsettling like community of Ned Flanders who is just like, has it out for you, you know. And I mean, I think Midsommar is definitely a very ambitious effort, and I'm glad he did it. But I don't know. Any other thoughts on Midsommar?
I mean, nothing really for me. I mean, it fits the Ari Aster mold. It's, you know, it's his take on folk horror.
Yeah.
Which was successful.
Yeah.
And this is like the movie that people talk about the most. I think this is probably his most successful film critically, I would think, because like this is the movie like people Scorsese are like talking
think
about
so.
still.
Yeah.
Like I've never heard Scorsese talk about Hereditary, but he's talked about Beau Is Afraid and Midsommar a lot.
Which I think, again, is a very high compliment to have somebody who has been emulated time and time again. I mean, speaking of a Joaquin Phoenix movie, Joker is very much Taxi Driver, like to a T.
Yeah.
Yeah, like this is the better version of that, I feel, where it's like you have Scorsese following you versus you just like completely copying Scorsese.
Yeah.
Right.
And also, like, I've seen Killers of the Flower Moon. I can definitely see the Hereditary and Beau Is Afraid in that movie, which is pretty awesome to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Midsommar had a budget of $9 million, so it didn't even get made for more than Hereditary. Grossed $48 million. So in comparison, not as financially successful, but critically well received. I think some people even consider this his best,
Yeah.
you know? And I thought that was going to be a take I would come out of it with. I don't know that I feel that way. I think it's definitely, I think like you said, it's maybe his second best. And I don't know. We'll debate it after we talk about Beau Is Afraid, but it's definitely, like I said, an ambitious movie that I think it's going to continue to change as people continue to visit it and talk about it. But after that, obviously, he had one more big idea for a horror movie that he wanted to do. Or we'll even talk about this, is if Beau Afraid.
Is it a horror movie?
But it was kind of this third part of his emotional grief trilogy thing. So the film had been in development for some time because he had that 2011 short film entitled Beau that essentially served as the basis for a sequence in the feature film, which I believe was the sequence where at the beginning where he loses his keys as he's trying to go visit his mom, and suddenly a lot of things happen. So in 2014, a draft of the script started circulating on the internet, and Ari Aster had described the film in many ways, including initially as a nightmare comedy, a Jewish Lord of the Rings, but Beau's just going to his mom's house. And if you pumped up a 10-year-old full of Zoloft and had him get your groceries.
It's also kind of like sending a stone person into a convenience store who's got paranoia up the wazoo.
Yeah. For sure. So Beau Is Afraid after it. So it was 4 years after Midsommar was made. So it took a while for him to really get this idea off the ground.
Get COVID in there too.
I mean, that's a big piece of it. Because it probably would have come together a little bit quicker. But yeah, he had to balance schedules. Joaquin Phoenix was also coming off working on some movies. I mean, he had Joker, which I think was also 2019. And
Come on.
yeah, come on. And yeah, I remember the initial title for this film was called Disappointment Boulevard, which then he eventually changed it to Beau Is Afraid, since it was taking so much inspiration from the movie Beau. And it's definitely whatever you expected after watching those first two. I kind of was even asking at the time, what could this movie be? And I still wasn't prepared for the anxiety storm that we got.
It's basically the id of the trilogy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a 3-hour panic attack. You just there's no
Mhm.
getting away from it. It's definitely his most abstract movie.
Mhm.
It definitely it's very Freudian. It definitely challenges a lot of not necessarily family dynamic, but specifically like mother-son dynamic. And I think this one in particular, there's as crazy as Hereditary and Midsommar are, they're pretty straightforward. They're pretty literal. Like what even if you don't realize you're seeing it, what you're seeing is what you're getting.
Yep.
Versus Beau Is Afraid is very like out there, and it's very how much of what I just saw actually happened. Like how much is in Beau's head, and a lot of the things that he's dealing with are very, it's a lot of symbolism, it's a lot of allegory, it's a lot of like there's no way most of this happened. But you kind of get you get there at the end, and then even the ending is very blocked differently from the whole rest of the movie. And you can tell that I feel like there's a lot more personal for Ari Aster in Beau Is Afraid
Yes.
than in the other two.
For sure.
It's a thing that he talks about where he says he tries to make every movie like he's not going to be able to make another one,
Mhm.
which with the way Hollywood is and what they're leaning towards makes sense.
Mhm.
And I think this is like the epitome of that. This is him like, if I don't get to make another one, I'm putting all of it in there.
Yeah.
And it's all in there. It's a movie that you said it feels like a 3-hour panic attack. It also, the plotting feels like that thing where you're going to sleep and then you think of something that stresses you out,
Mhm.
and then it compounds and builds and builds and builds. And like, I don't have I have anxiety. I have things that I get very anxious about and it hits me, but I wouldn't say I have like debilitating anxiety,
Mhm.
you know? But I definitely felt kind of seen by this movie, even though it's like blown out of the water, extreme heightening.
Yeah.
You can break it down to like, oh, I totally get like all the stuff in this movie. At least that was my experience.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you've ever had an anxious moment in your life, you will definitely understand what it was like. Or if you ever had a panic attack, you will understand what some of these things are like. It's the ultimate story of an unreliable narrator, though, too, where
Mhm.
you're following somebody who is perceiving reality in a way like that maybe is actually how they perceive reality.
Mhm.
Not saying that's what it is, but I mean, it's just these moments where he continues to see the same guy like rush him at the door based on what was probably one moment in his life that this happened. But every single time, he's always worried that that guy's going to try and get in the building right behind me the minute I open this door.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, it's like, I think the ultimate magic trick. And again, I think there is always this like feeling that Ari Aster's kind of like showing you a sleight of hand the minute you're watching these movies, because you're like, what is what I'm seeing reality? Is this right? And then it's like it almost takes you having to watch it again to see how the trick is done.
Mhm.
And I haven't had a chance to revisit this yet, but I have a feeling that even on a rewatch, this one's going to make less sense than the other two.
I think this is one that you could watch dozens of times and you're going to have a slightly different takeaway after every watch. This one is also like, it's also his most political horror movie, if you can call it a horror movie. It's suspense and it's tension, but it defies category. It doesn't neatly fit into a horror box, but he does have the the political commentary of the inner city or metropolis deterioration in America, or at least as is perceived by certain groups. You have what I think is probably the most darkly funny line in the entire movie of a police officer holding a gun at a naked Beau, telling him, "Don't force me to shoot you." Like,
And how scared the cop is.
yeah, and he's literally being attacked by the naked stabber dude, and the cop is like, "I'm gonna kill you if you don't stop scaring me." Very on the nose. You also have the whole like second act of middle America or suburban America as being really the dark like undertone of America. And I mean, you've got a mom popping pills to cope with the loss of her son. You have Nathan Lane in a dad that sounds like a sitcom dad from the 80s. You've got the darkly angry screaming daughter, and then the deceased son's war buddy turned killing machine,
who could have, when I watched it the second time, might have had something to do with why the son's not there, because they say at one point like he'd attack his own like, you know, I was gonna say crew members, but like
platoon,
and like they don't say that's what happened, but like, and also, did you know that guy is the guy from beginning of Inglourious Bastards, the French guy?
I did not.
But he's like heavier and a bigger, you know, role, man. Which is crazy to think about. Just two different roles.
Wow, the dad that's at the house that Christoph Waltz visits.
Yep,
wow.
That's him.
Wow, that's pretty incredible.
I did not know that.
I didn't either.
That's some cuts. I mean, and this movie has a heck of a cast. I mean, we already mentioned that Parker Posey's in this. We haven't talked a lot about the actors, but I think we're going to kind of get into that in a little bit.
Amy Ryan's great.
Yeah. Oh man, wonderful. But I think there's just so much throughout this, and I think you calling this a political movie, I mean, yeah, and I think it's politicized even in the idea of like, here is somebody who's been stuck in like Arrested Development for pretty much their entire life, trying to figure out what they want to do with their life or trying to find any semblance of normalcy, and it's like they're just completely paralyzed in every decision in every moment that they live. And I mean, you feel it for him. You kind of pull for Beau throughout this, even realizing though that it's like, does he ever really want to get better? Like,
he's kind of I mean, I don't want to call him a piece of shit, because like he's clearly been stunted by his relationship with his mother. He's basically an 8-year-old. You see it in how he dresses and how he acts, how he engages with conversation in the opposite sex. You see it in the flashbacks with his mom. Like his mom, so his dad dies. We can go into later exactly how, or supposedly how, but his dad dies. His mom clearly like blames him for it, but at the same time doesn't want to be alone. So she manipulates Beau into never wanting to like leave her comfort or embrace or protection.
yeah.
And he's a now 50-year-old man that is the result of what growing up like that looks like. And how much is in his head, how much is real, how much is actually happening. I tend to think that there's a couple schools of thought on Beau Is Afraid, and that one, none of it's real. It's all in Beau's head. Two, his mom, who is like, funny you say Willy Wonka, or
Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz. She's like the wizard. She controls everything.
Yeah.
Did she really control everything that happens in the movie? Does she have her hand in it? Or is it kind of a combination of both? And I tend to think that it's a combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's that. I think it's like, whether it's, you know, say he gets a missed call or something, I don't really remember how the beginning goes. I think it's just that brain train of thought where you're like, oh, what happened? Did this happen? Did this happen? If that happened, then this might happen. And I feel like that's the movie, that like paranoid anxiety thought, those things that run through your head happens and plays out in the movie. And that's what I think the movie is.
Yeah. And so it's constantly trying to track what Beau is doing when it really could have been the most simple, like 2-hour segment of life, of like, he went outside, he clearly didn't want to go on this trip, he left his keys in his door on purpose, he came back, didn't know where they were, and suddenly he's like, oh, I don't know. And then it's just going through all the different things of what a trip out there could look like, and what if his mom had died, and what if all this happened. And because I mean, and it's a very watchable movie even in that regard, even though the whole time you're kind of feel like you got like creepy crawlies all over your skin because you're just like, ugh.
It's very uncomfortable.
Again, I know the sequence in Hereditary where you're kind of uncomfortable after Millie Shapiro dies. You're still feeling that for a lot of Beau Is Afraid. You're just like, it's like watching a Safdie's movie, like trying to do like a horror movie. And
I do feel I was able to laugh more than I was in the other films, even on the first go through. I think there's a lot of like funny shit in Beau Is Afraid from the get-go.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
you mentioned Nathan Lane, like
he's
very darkly funny. There's way more humor. There's way more situational comedy and physical comedy on top of it. Even Joaquin Phoenix, who I don't typically think of as being a physical comedic actor, like he's got great timing in this movie.
Oh yeah.
And yeah.
No, I mean, he definitely, I mean, it's no shortage of moments where there is a little bit of comic relief, but it's almost like never enough because then it follows that up with a sequence. And we talk about him making abstract sequences. I think that nothing really sticks out in my head more than the whole scene in the middle. We literally stop at a moment where Beau finds himself in the woods, running from that French guy who is the the war buddy that like chased him from the house as he's trying to escape. And he finds himself at like this theater camp in the middle of the woods, which is the most theater camp shit you can ever think of.
Yeah.
I like that part a lot.
It's like a theater troupe just chilling, and they're like, we're going to put on plays in the middle of the woods. And he sits down to watch this play where he's almost kind of envisioning his life of what it could be if he had settled down and had children. And it's like, and you almost kind of wonder to a point of like, did this happen? Is this going to happen for him? And it's just, and it's almost like the fact that he's watching a play, you're like, yeah, this is probably all fiction in his head of things that he would have loved to have had happen. And it's kind of accepting that it can't happen because he's just not capable of that type of life. And it's just, it's a jarring but beautiful sequence where you're just still like, you almost are like watching a whole other movie in the middle of the movie.
Yeah.
That to me, I felt like was like his like 2001 Space Odyssey. Like that gave me the vibes of that, just like a moment where it's just gonna break the movie and do this, kind of out there thing, abstract thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole, even the art direction of that whole sequence is wildly different than the entire rest of the movie.
Yeah.
And it sets itself apart kind of as its own standalone thing. And I like to think that it's basically, Beau is basically on a hero's journey, right? Like if you think of the Odyssey, he even literally crosses a threshold to begin his journey by leaving his apartment.
Well, even before that, leaving the womb.
Yeah. I mean, to literally his mother screaming at him about why he's not crying. And then like you have this sequence in the woods where he's seeing what I think his life could have been if not for his overbearing, controlling mother.
Yeah.
And he's seeing his life as the hero and what it would have been. And he cries at the end, realizing that like, this is what I wanted. This is what I've always wanted. I will never have that because of where I am now.
Yeah. And it's sort of funny because I think in one school of thought, right, it's almost like Ari Aster put another short film in the middle of this movie. But at the same end, hitting in on this idea of like, there are like so many of these monomythic like elements to this. You could teach this in a mythology class and talk about like even just all the Oedipal things that are going on with Beau and his mom. And like the fact that the whole driving force of this is that he finds out that she died after he didn't come to visit her, and he's trying to voyage to get to this funeral. And it's like, why is this such a chore to get to his house? But yeah, it is. He's like Odysseus trying to get back home. And there's all these things that happen. And man, it's just, it really, really, you're just along for the ride, just not knowing what you're watching is true. Or if he's just chilling in his apartment and like, this is all the things that can happen.
Yeah.
But I don't know, the ending then.
You get to that he finally gets to the house and you start seeing the tentacles of Mona Wasserman, the mother, Patti LuPone, and that's where it starts creeping in of like, did she do this? Like, did she plan this? Because you start seeing like the Wasserman company like employee posters, and even on the first watch, I picked out like 2 or 3 faces where I was like, these are like Nathan Lane is on the poster.
Oh, wow.
You have like the slasher dude that's trying to get in his apartment. He's an employee. Like, I guarantee you on another couple watches, there's all over the place.
It's like the cult members in Hereditary.
Yeah.
Is that like they're going to be everywhere. These are employees of his mom. And then also that goes into like, she used the nanny to fake her death. Sorry, spoilers. But
Hey, we're spoiling it all.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we're kind of walking through it piece by piece, but that even that picking that employee to fake the death, I think is another controlling aspect of Beau, because that was Beau's closest thing to a real mom.
Yeah.
And she hated it. Mona Wasserman hated it. Beau's real mom hated it. And I think it's on purpose that she chose that employee to die to fake her own death.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, we got to talk about the penis monster, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
I read a thing online and they called him Jabba the Nuts. And
That's great.
I thought that was just perfect. But
I hope he books more.
I mean, just like the God, that whole sequence, that's another thing where you're like, we are way off the reservoir here. We are like, this isn't actually happening. This is definitely in Beau's head. We're going into the attic. This is very Freudian of like mind. The penis monster, it's not his dad. Like, her mom didn't have sex with a penis monster with spider legs. I think it's supposed to be like Beau's repressed sexuality.
Right.
Mhm.
And then there's the twin brother, quote unquote, that's like chained up with the penis monster. I think that that's actually supposed to be emblematic of like Beau's independent self that was locked away by his mom and is withering away.
Yeah, there's like homages to that or foreshadowing that, because he has that dream where he's in the bathtub and he sees his mom like kind of pulling on this other kid.
Yeah.
That, you know, is he the kid? Is he the person watching?
And she puts him up in the attic. And then after that, like, he comes down from the attic after seeing the monster. And the mom is like, you idiot, that wasn't a dream, that was a memory. And you're like, that's horrible.
Right.
Like, you're the lengths that this mother has gone to like just smother Beau, it's not surprising that he turned out the way he did.
No, I know. I mean, it's like, it is the embodiment of like sexual repression. I think that's a great thing. And then to even have him, I'm still like trying to figure out, did Parker Posey actually have a heart attack like after they had sex? Like, it's because it's just like, here's this moment where he's so afraid that he's been told his whole life if he has sex, he's gonna have like this heart issue because that's what killed his dad. And you know, and it's like,
and the whole lineage, not just his dad, but his grandfather, like every male in the line dies on first ejaculation. Like, what a way to like sexually stunt a kid.
Yeah. It's just crazy. And I mean, I don't know. Or did something happen to Parker Post? Did the mom plan something? We don't know, because we know she was a former employee too. But yeah, the whole idea of like his mom just being, I don't know, this burden in his life. And I mean, like, what does that say about Ari Aster? I mean, it's like, I don't know, he even needs to do a tell-all book. He'd be like, it's all on screen. Figure it out.
Beau Is Afraid is a pretty like lambasting of any kind of mother figure interaction. And that's also kind of why I was making the point that like, I think Beau Is Afraid has the most of Ari personally in it. Out of, and it's interesting because he's done interviews and stuff of like, of course everyone's gonna ask him, what does this movie mean, because it's fucking impossible to figure out what this movie means. And his response has always been like, I made this movie to be interpreted by those who watch it. For me to give my interpretation would be a disservice to my audience. And it's funny that he says it that way, because I actually think the very ending with the trial is actually, and inward look at his relationship with the audience in the background as cinema goers, because Ari's on trial. Ari Aster's on trial. He's the filmmaker. He's making the decisions. Every single decision that he makes in making this movie, other movies, any movie, is going to be put under a microscope and judged fairly or unfairly by those in the trial. And at the end of the day, I think it's very interesting that, like, at the end, they all just kind of get up and walk away, and none of it actually mattered.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in the theater. I wanted to stand up and start applauding. I thought it was such a boss move just to roll credits like that.
Yeah.
Because I was in a theater with people who were not feeling it at first.
Yeah.
You know, like, and I just wanted to be like, nah, this is all good right here.
Yeah, he's literally drowning at the end, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, and it's just you just wonder, yeah, is Ari Aster, did he kind of foresee the results of this? Because this movie was his first official bomb.
Yeah.
It was budgeted at $35 million. It only made $11.5 million at the box office.
Hate to see it.
That feels low, right?
Oh,
Like,
it's extremely
Yeah.
low. Yeah, I mean, we just talked about Hereditary made $80 million.
Yeah.
I mean, so
But I don't think anyone was interested in seeing this movie unless they knew who Ari Aster was, and that's a small percentage of movie-going public.
right.
Like, I don't think a lot of people were watching the trailer for Beau Is Afraid thing, and that's for me.
Well, and I think that's the hard part of, like, he's built this resume of being a premier horror director, and this film does not fit as a pure horror. There are horror elements. There's the same through line, manipulation of the family dynamic. You still have the dysfunction, stunted growth. You have all the things that are in all the other movies in as commentary on the family dynamic and the subversion of that, but it doesn't fit into, like, really horror.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not going to get you to box office. Just
Like, you had to, I don't know, this one's weird because, like, you kind of had to, like, know that this is what the movie was going to be ahead of time, but at the same time, I don't think anyone was really prepared for this.
Yeah. And I think it's definitely a guy who relies on good reviews, good press, because I think Hereditary was such a huge word of mouth movie. People are like, you will not believe what this movie does. And then you get a lot of people coming off the goodwill of, like, oh, he made another horror movie. Oh my gosh, I got to go see Midsommar. And even then it was like, okay, modest results. But yeah, we're also at a time though too, where the movie theater has not been great. I mean, this year there have been big movies, but they're fewer and far between, you know, because we had, you know, John Wick in March was probably one of the bigger ones, but, you know, even relatively it made $400 million, which is great for a movie. But, you know, it's like, you expected that to be gangbusters, and then you had Guardians of the Galaxy 3, which came out the month after that, but it was kind of a dead period in April, and it's just like nobody was going to the movies until Barbenheimer happened, and suddenly it's like everybody's like back, you know, we're like, got it, we're back, baby. And so I think you have a lot of mix of things of people who just were like, all right, I'll just kind of wait till it comes out.
Well, that's the thing. It's about to hit Netflix, so I'm very curious. I think this movie's going to get, I wouldn't call it a second life, but I think you're going to see it talked about more because more people are going to find it on Netflix.
I think its residuals are going to do really well. I mean, and this also goes back to, like, movies pre-streaming where they weren't so reliant on the blockbuster take, like, because they had the residuals, they had the after marketing, they had, you know, DVD sales and all that, or VHS prior to that. Where they could pick up on the back end. And today you really have to hit a streaming service to get any of that tertiary cash flow. And I think because of that, people aren't making movies like Beau Is Afraid. It's become, this has turned into a cinema rant, but it's become much more formulaic driven, or, you know, kind of dumbed down blockbusters as opposed to something like this, which is extremely ambitious. Even if it's not for you, it's a very artistic movie.
Yeah.
And we're not getting a lot of those.
And I think that's why a lot of people are glomming onto horror though too, because they want to know where the different movies are that aren't a superhero movie, that aren't a whatever else. It's not just something that's like, yes, here's an engine where Jared Leto's gonna be something bullshitty. It's like you're gonna actually get somebody who has something to say. And yeah, whether or not you're gonna necessarily like it, maybe not. But it's just a different world than 5 years ago when people were running to the theaters before COVID to go and see a horror movie.
Right.
And it's, and I think, again, whether Beau Is Afraid is a horror movie is up to it. I think it's more psychological, anxious thrill ride, but it's something.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the big question then is, so where does Ari Aster go from here? What's next in his book?
A Western, apparently, right?
Is that the thought?
Yeah, I thought it was some sort of Western.
Ooh.
I would really like to see an Ari Aster Western. I feel like he's so good at like taking the expected from a movie style and kind of giving it to you, but in his own way, and then twisting it to fit his narrative. And I feel like there's so much room to play in a Western that it would just be like him in a sandbox. Just have at it.
Yeah, I think we're in coulda, woulda, shoulda territory for sure.
We are.
And I'm gonna say mine real simply. You do you, Beau. Cause I like what he's doing. I don't want to be like. I guess if I was gonna pick something, I'd say, look, I don't want it anytime soon. I want you to make a bunch of movies, but throw us another horror, like straight up horror. Give us one more.
Yeah.
I don't need it anytime soon, but I want at least one more from you in the vein of Hereditary. But I don't want to be like, I want him to do this. I don't want him to do that. I'm excited to see whatever he wants to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that's something that Jordan Peele has kind of glommed onto as well, because even if you look at a movie like Nope, you kind of come in expecting a horror movie, and there's unsettling, scarier elements, but that's not on a horror movie all throughout. The scariest stuff is not even the alien related thing. It's the stuff with the chimp, right? Like,
Nope's so good.
it is a good
It
movie.
took me a few, like always liked it, but man, that's a great movie, I think.
Yeah.
I think Peele's got another trilogy right there he came out with Get Out, which is fantastic. It's really tight. Us, that's my favorite of his three. That one I think is more pure horror. That one was just really, really good. And I liked Nope. It wasn't my favorite. But I think that kind of ties into the trilogy here of I didn't love Beau Is Afraid. I didn't dislike it. But what it emphasizes is I want to see Ari Aster taking risks in movies.
Yeah.
And I don't really care what it is, but I want to watch it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's definitely become a director now, I think, where it's like, if you have seen his work, you're probably going to want to see the next thing he does.
Definitely.
He's
go ahead.
got like a Fincher thing going for him right now. And David Fincher's kind of in the zeitgeist because he's got The Killer coming out very shortly. But
Tomorrow on Netflix.
is that right?
Yeah.
Ooh.
I'm excited.
Again, talking about the state of cinema. We have this big movie from this director who's directed, I would say he's kind of laid the path a little bit for Ari Aster, David Fincher did.
For sure.
Yeah.
And because none of his movies are outright horror, but they have very spooky elements.
Yeah, they have elements.
They are very dark dramas and that have some humorous things to them. But sorry, Fred, what were you saying?
I was just gonna say, I don't remember the exact gist of it. I was just gonna say I don't want to see an Ari Aster movie come into Netflix, straight to Netflix, because on my second rewatch of Beau Is Afraid, I was like, this is good, but it does not hit like it did in theaters.
I mean, here's the hot take. I don't think either of those movies hit the same way they hit in theaters.
True.
There's something about seeing these movies on a big screen, especially when you have, because one of the biggest things I noted about Hereditary, and I made the mistake of watching it with like a light on here, and you can't do it.
No.
You're
No.
missing so much, because what makes that movie so good is noticing things in the background while you're on a still scene for like 3 minutes, and suddenly you notice somebody's moving around, and you're like, oh God, and it makes your skin crawl.
Yeah, it's what's in the background is what's
Yeah.
important.
And I think that's the thing. These are movies that are meant to be watched in a dark setting with no distractions. It's just you in the movie, so that you really take in what he's trying to show you. So yeah, I would love to see another horror movie out of him. But I think at the same end though, too, if he's willing to take another swing and be like, yeah, I got a Western in my pocket that I really want to show you, like a really like kind of dark version of the West, sort of like a Deadwood of some sort, you know, maybe a little less, it's a little fantastical, but still.
Yeah, I get you.
But I'd also love to see him try something that just is a little bit different, like him do something like a John Wick, where he is kind of trying something more action and start putting those chops to the test. Like, I'd love to see him do a long sequence in a room, kind of like the Daredevil, like fight in the hallway scene, right? Where he's just working his way through guys. Because that show was filmed so beautifully. And man, I don't know. I just think he could bring something to that. Any other coulda, woulda, shouldas you guys want to share?
No, I do want to see. He produced that new Nicolas Cage movie, and that's another thing. He's like doing more producing stuff, and I'm curious to see what that looks like. Him kind of taking the producer seat. It's the
What
new
movie
movie.
is that?
I don't remember the name of it, but I know the plot is that Nicolas Cage is some sort of professor who starts appearing in people's dreams.
Oh, is it Dream Scenario?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, there you
And
go.
that's produced by Ari Aster. So that's another thing I'm excited to see, the kind of projects he's going to put his name behind.
It's interesting that he's doing that too, because that's like Sam Raimi did that, where he had his director movies and then he moved into a producer role. He still like threw a little flavor on it, but he wasn't like calling all of the shots.
Exactly. And you can see that flavor, like when I told you that plot. If I told you that was the next plot of the next Ari Aster movie, you'd be like, yeah, that sounds like like an Ari Aster movie.
Yeah.
Nicolas Cage, it sounds like someone who would be the lead of an Ari Aster movie. Like,
Yeah.
Yep.
Which, oh man, I would love him to direct Cage just to see what he could do with them.
oh, for sure.
The range of emotions,
Yeah.
which is a perfect transition, I think, to talk about our power rankings for this week. Yeah, we're clicking, baby, which is the top 3 performances in this trilogy. So we didn't spend a lot of time on the cast, but now it's time to throw down who are your performers. Nick, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I can start. This is really hard because I feel like particularly, I mean, really all 3 of these movies, the impactful cast list is pretty short.
Mm-hmm.
And they all nail it.
Mm-hmm.
Like good, bad, or otherwise, they all nail it.
Yeah.
And like everyone, I feel like with Hereditary, everyone talked about Toni Collette. Everyone was talking about Toni Collette, and she's fantastic and left her mark on that movie. And that movie is not the same without her in that role. But I also think Alex Wolff,
Yeah.
the kid that played Peter, I think he's got to be in my top 3 because there's something different about a kid playing with PTSD
Yeah.
that it's either campy and misses the mark or they nail it, and he nailed it. And he jumped off the deep end to nail it. I mean, this kid broke his own nose on a desk going all out in this movie, and it's every scene with him, it hits the marks, it hits the tone, it is a perfect role.
Yeah.
Which is really hard to do for, especially, I think that was one of his first feature movies, and to be
Sounds right.
that like that
I'll check it.
impactful of a character, that's got to be in my top 3.
Don't forget he's in Jumanji. Level Up.
I did forget about that.
He
my bad.
plays The Rock.
I think he is. Yeah, he's the Rock's character. I think you're right. Who else you got?
I mean, it's hard because like still in Hereditary, Millie Shapiro, she's not in it very long, but she was perfect for the role.
Yeah.
I can't think of anyone else in that role, and I think that speaks to just how perfect of a casting it was. I can't put her in my top 3 just because there's just not enough there to really put it up that high. I think these are in no particular order, by the way. I think number 2 is going to be Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah.
Because, oh man, just the level of anxiety and just the little ticks and the just real weight that he threw into that character is spectacular.
Yeah.
And yeah, he's definitely in the top 3.
Of course.
I also want to say Florence Pugh. I feel like that's a little bit of a cop out for number 3. She was excellent in Midsommar. I feel like personally, I felt she gave the best performance of that movie. If I were not picking Florence Pugh and getting one actor from each movie, then I think I would go back to Toni Collette.
Yeah.
Just because it was just a sensational performance.
I mean, yeah, it was an Oscar-worthy performance.
Yeah.
There's no question. Those are good picks. Fred, what do you got?
So yeah, I'll jump off of what you just said. I would put Toni Collette as my number 1. For me, it's the second time she's given an Oscar-worthy performance in a horror movie that got overlooked. I think this, and again, I'm going to bring up Sixth Sense. She's got that great scene in the car where Haley Joel Osment's telling her about her mother.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Hereditary and Sixth Sense are very similar movies.
Yep.
And
I'm seeing it now.
Right. So that one is number 1 for me. Definitely overlooked. I'm gonna do a Pugh for number 2.
Oh,
Florence Pugh for number 2. And I almost wanted to share number 3, like 2 actors, but I'm gonna give it to Nathan Lane because he comes in and just, I know he's doing the Nathan Lane thing, but I have never laughed so hard when like Beau's freaking out about like having to get home, and he's like, "But you have got to rest, my brother." Just the way. But in a perfect world, I'd share 3 because they're just my guys. Nathan Lane and Richard Kind can share the third part. Because Richard Kind being menacing works. That phone call, I felt like someone was being stern with me, and I was just watching.
Yeah. Oh man, those are great. I mean, it's pretty.
Every day, your mother cannot rest her soul until you get back. Just like all of that. Like, we're waiting, Beau.
Yeah, he's just channeling that same energy he's got. He plays a good role in Big Mouth too. It's just it's so good. I mean, it's hard to pick anybody else other than you guys brought up. I think I would. I mean, Toni Collette's an easy number 1 with a bullet. Like, again, it's an Oscar-worthy performance that she didn't get even nominated for, which is a crime.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just putting pure emotion on the screen. And I think Ari Aster did such a great job finding people who could really imbue like real emotion. And like her response to her daughter dying is like some of the most heartbreaking stuff you'll ever hear, because you can just hear it. It's like it feels so real. And to that point, number 2, I think I also would go with Florence Pugh and say she's also like lost people who mean a lot to her, tried to fight for these people or her sister, and felt like not only that she failed, but also like, okay, now I'm also like deeply wounded to the point of like, how do you go on? And she is the worst person in the world to lean on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess number 3 is hard because I did kind of want to go Nathan Lane. He's definitely an honorable mention. He's so good in that, and it's like a good year for Nathan Lane, especially when he came back and like Only Murders in the Building, and he's doing some really good work in there. I think I would have to give it to probably Alex Wolff as well. And because Alex Wolff's just become one of my guys. When he shows up, he's good. His first movie, by the way, or his first like real feature length, was not Hereditary. It was The Sitter, starring Jonah Hill.
Oh, wow.
Oh, jeez.
It's a small role in there. That movie is
David Gordon Green, right?
Fred, the more we talk about this guy, the more I'm like, does he make that good of movies?
By the way, I saw Exorcist, the Believer.
Yeah, how was it?
It's kind of a dry fart.
Yeah,
It's nothing. It did not deserve to be taken out back and shot like people did, but it's kind of a wet fart.
yeah.
Gotcha.
That's too bad.
That's unfortunate.
But I think Alex Wolff has found himself a nice career. And I think one of the things you can say for Ari Aster is he's found people, like casts that really elevate. Because like Florence Pugh, that was like a career announcing role when she was in Midsommar. I felt like once people saw her or even talked about her in that, she was on the radar of like, what else can she do? And it's like, and then she puts in like a real performance in a Marvel movie. And it's like, damn. And it's just, and she's great. And pretty much everything she's done, she got a rough loop in with Chris Pine too in that fucking Harry Styles movie. I don't even know what it was called anymore, but
Don't worry, darling.
Well,
Never saw it.
There you go. But yeah, I mean, it's just a great group of people. It's so hard to pick three. I do think they rise to the top, and you could make him a lot of arguments for three. Gabriel Byrne, we talked about him before too.
Just steady hand.
Just, I mean, did he deserve to get lit on fire at the end? Maybe not, but hey, who didn't deserve to get lit on fire at the end of any of these movies?
I was trying to think the other movie that Alex Wolff was good in recently, and all ties in. He was good in Pig.
Yeah, with Nicolas Cage.
Okay.
Oh, is that movie excellent?
That needs a rewatch.
That's the movie that makes me give faith of like, you put Nicolas Cage and Ari Aster, he's going to win an Academy Award.
Oh, hell yeah.
He can do it. He can in the right situation. I mean, he's got range. He's got just enough crazy.
Yeah.
So that could be our group coulda, woulda, shoulda. Is we want Nicolas Cage to get an Oscar in the next Ari Aster movie.
Yeah. Ari really, he was really one of the most well-prepared directors.
I do have one other guy that I do want to note, and it's a deep cut in Beau Is Afraid. It's Julian Richings, and he plays
the therapist.
No, he's the strange man at the theater camp that I think is Beau's real dad.
That's a great scene.
Yeah, there you go.
And like, he's not in the movie very long, but there's just some weight behind the character. He kind of steals a little bit of the scene there a little bit, even with Joaquin Phoenix. Shout out, he also had a long running character spot in Supernatural.
Of course.
As Death.
Always comes back.
But just, he was very well cast. As soon as I saw him, I was like, that guy's going to be important. So, got to throw out there for that.
I did think you were going to say the therapist, which I do like, from Dune.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
And that guy has been popping up in everything. He was in Devs on that TV show. A lot of great roles. It's just, I think whoever Ari Aster is using to help him cast is just brilliant. Just wonderful, wonderful casting, wonderful performances in all of these. Really excited to see where he goes. I think it's such an early part of his career. Only 37, and then that's really sticking in my craw. So I think that gets us to the end of the episode here, guys. I think we've said more than I thought we were going to say about the Ari Aster movies, but I think that's because they are rich texts. There's a lot that's in these. I think we could have gone on for another hour talking about them, but that there'd be more time for that if we ever have more installments. Before we go, though, anything that you would like to plug? Nick, if you want to start, anything you would like to.
Nothing really to plug right now. Kids, you better be sleeping.
If you're listening this far,
yes, that's pretty much
this
it.
is not the episode they should listen to.
No, definitely not.
Fred, anything for you?
just gonna let you plug the cast for us because that's all I got going on right now.
No, that's all that I think I'll even share myself. State of the Franchise podcast with Fred and Tom. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, kind of YouTube channel. Come find us out there. Send us an email at stateofthefranchisepodcast@gmail.com. If you have any questions or quotes for the show, leave us a review. 5 stars, please. And subscribe if you haven't yet. We got episodes every other week right now. And stay tuned for next time, where we'll be talking about the MCU. Well, in a very abbreviated way. We're going to do a little draft. So stay tuned for then, and we'll see you guys next time.
Just charge my phone.